Okay, I want to talk about the infant child assessment that's coming up that you have due. By now, hopefully you have a child in mind that you want to assess. And I know that everybody's really anxious about how they're supposed to assess this person. Some people have said, do I go watch them? What am I doing? So I'm here to answer those questions. An assessment is something that all social workers do. So this is your chance to get your feet wet, to figure out how best to approach a family and how to ask them questions. Now, what I'll tell you is families like to talk. You wouldn't think so, but once you start, oftentimes you might get way more information than you actually need. Other families, there are a few, but most of the, you might end up with a family who doesn't really want to share very much. You kind of get what you get. An assessment entails going to someone's house, sitting down. Usually, if you're doing a child, it's with the parents or the caregivers, foster family, whoever's taking care of them. You're going to ask them questions about the child. If the child, you want to be able to see the child, just to get a view of who they are and what they do. You want to get a basic view of the house, of where they live, because that tells you a lot about the family. But essentially, you're going to come in, you're going to, introduce yourself like you would anybody else, and then you let them tell you where to sit, get comfortable, and then you start with these sections here. And you can find this under the assignment for the infant child assessment. It's in the folder on Blackboard. And you just go through these one by one. That's the easiest way to start, okay? You start talking about the child. Hey, what's your child's name? How old are they? You want basic demographics of the kid. How old are they? Basic ethnicity. What does the family identify as for ethnicity? And oftentimes here you'll start hearing about, well, the father is this and the mother is something else, and they'll give you a lot of information for the most part, okay? And then you start asking about social supports, and remember, we're looking at it from a systems theory perspective in terms of who's there to help the family, who can they rely on when there's an emergency. Where do the parents go to talk over problems if there's things going on with the family? Do they go to church? Do they have a basic set of friends? Some families don't have any social supports. They're very isolated, and that in itself will tell you a lot about a family, okay? And then the family constellation, who lives in the house, okay? Are there relatives that live nearby? Who lives in town? Or do they live here all by themselves and everybody else lives in, like, New York State? This will also tell you a lot about, again, your social supports, but it tells you about the people around the family itself, okay? And here is a good place when you do these two, if you pull out the echo map and the genogram and work with the family to fill that out, which you can find in chapter 12 of the book, that will tell you a lot. And essentially when you're doing those maps, this is what you're looking for. You want to know who's there for the family, okay? And who's the social supports, and what kind of family can they rely on? And of course, family dynamics are different for every family, and you're going to get a lot of good information, and that's essentially what you're looking for here, is what are the family dynamics, right? Is there a sister that lives nearby, and can you talk, do they get along, or is that a dysfunctional relationship? Okay. Medical issues. You always want to talk about, and especially for an infant child, and again for the teen, you want to talk about are there any medical issues as they've grown up? Was the pregnancy good? Because that tells you sometimes a lot about development. Did they have a normal pregnancy? Did they have a normal delivery? Did the child walk at the right age? Any major medical issues that are going on? Okay, which brings us to developmental milestones, because medical and developmental somehow go together, because here's essentially where you're going to talk about where's the child at now, but again, Did they walk on time? Did they talk on time? Are they socially developed? This is where you're going to use the chapters in your book to look at, and especially chapter 2, to look at, are they reaching their basic developmental milestones? Okay. Parent caretaking. You really want them, ask them, can you describe how your parenting skill, not your skills, but your parenting, how do you go about parenting? Do you have a philosophy on parenting? And they'll tell you, okay? Social emotional aspects of development, okay? This is where we're going to look at chapter 4. Other than walking and talking, are they interacting with other people as they should, okay? And here you're going to rely on the information that you got from chapter 4, okay? And then ask the caretakers, how would you describe your kid, And if you are parents, you'll know you're going to describe your kid as, wow, they got a lot of energy, right? Or they're bouncing off the walls all the time. Or, wow, she's a sweet kid who doesn't do anything wrong. But this is where you give them a chance to talk, okay? Place in the family. Where's the child's place in the family? I kind of let them define this, right? It might be a first child. It might be a third child. They might be the apple of everyone's eye, or the child might be might be the scapegoat, but you won't know that. They probably won't tell you that. But ask them, where does the child fit into your family, okay? And the physical environment is what you're going to see, right? What do you see around the child? How is the house? What kind of neighborhood is it in? Is it clean? Is it a little disarrayed? Okay. Those are the kind of things that you can view. You would also ask, okay? And then the community environment surrounding the child. How strong is the community? What kind of city do they live in? Do they know their neighbors? Do they talk to their neighbors? Okay. Make sure that you do follow anything else that's on the syllabus, but here's what you're going to go down when you sit and talk with the family, and you really are just going to talk with them. Now, if the child is usually up till about 5, you might ask them some questions depending on their developmental abilities, but gauge it on how old they are. Like if you're picking a kid who's 8, you might include them in this, right, and have them talk about some of this. But if you just talk with the parents, you might get a better view than if the child's there, because sometimes you realize that parents may not want the kid to know some of the stuff that's going on. So let the family guide you in that, okay? And again, you might have family members who don't want to answer some of these questions. That tells you something about it, and you just add it to the assessment. You're like, you know what? Parents didn't want to talk about their ethnicity. They weren't interested in that. So you just write that in your assessment. You don't push. You don't go, well, but I have to have it on my assessment. You ask the question and then you move on, okay? And you get what you get. And you might get a lot of information. You might not get much at all, but you include all that into your assessment. And make sure that at the end, you put in your view of the family. What's your professional take on the family, okay? Were they open? Did you feel like they were honest? Did you see any red flags that popped up while you were talking with them? All of this is important to think about, okay? Because essentially what you're doing is you're getting a bunch of information to tell a story so that the next social worker who comes along, they can read your assessment and get a view of the kid and not have to go back and ask them the questions, okay? And if you have any questions about this, certainly email me or stop by for my office hours. I'm always available. Thanks. Bye.